Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew DeSantis,
And I'm Kaylie Shapiro.
and welcome to the NYRA Bets Road to the Kentucky Derby.
I'm the Kentucky Oaks.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Road to the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks with myself and my NYRA Bets colleague, Kaylie Shapiro. Before we get to Kaylie and some of the great races that are taking place at Colonial Downs this weekend, I want to encourage you all to press that like and subscribe button today on NYRA Bets YouTube. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, whether that be race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, weekly programming like this one, and so much more. So make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. Kaylie, we are going to a new place on the Derby Road. The Derby Road, I don't know if it's a spur, I don't know if it's an extension, I don't know if it's a new exit, but we're going to a new track, and that is Colonial Downs. That is hosting a very special 3-day event this weekend. Usually they're a fall meet with Churchill Downs Incorporated purchasing Colonial. They've moved the Virginia Derby and Virginia Oaks, off the turf and onto the dirt, and also from the fall to the spring. And it's now a 50-point Kentucky Derby prep race. Really exciting. It feels like a whole new, it's obviously a whole new race in some ways, but it's really a new dynamic to take into consideration here on the road to the Oaks and Derby.
For sure, it was pretty interesting to handicap these races. I mean, it's a one turn, both races are just one turn. So that was definitely, a little bit of a challenge when you're looking at these horses that we've been, handicapping, usually going two turns at this point. So
Mm-hmm.
pretty interesting dynamic and shake up. But yeah, I'm excited to go to a new location.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Colonial's a great track. I used to live in Northern Virginia. My mom lives in Central Virginia, about an hour from there. Took her to the uh, Virginia Derby Day, actually back when, oh God, 2022 maybe, I think. Took her there. So, yeah, we had a great time. It's a beautiful track. It's in the middle of nowhere, admittedly, but it's still a lovely track and great people out there. So, definitely encourage you to check it out. But as Kaylie mentioned, these two races are one-turn races. The Virginia Oaks is a mile and a 16th. It's a one-turn race. The Virginia Derby is a mile and an eighth. It's also a one-turn race. So we're going to go through and talk about these, but that is an important dynamic to keep in mind because, as Kaylie mentioned, a lot of these horses have been doing two turns. Now we're going back to one turn. So it's some different dynamics to take into consideration. There's some data that we'll share with you when we got to the Virginia Derby with regards to how does this impact 9 furlong races, et cetera. So going to be a lot of fun, but listen, let's dive into the Virginia Oaks, which is the first of the two prep races this weekend and on Saturday at Colonial Downs. And this is a field of 8, again, going that one turn mile and a 16th. And your morning line favorite, very tepid morning line favorite at 3-1, is Kenny McPeek's Gowells Delight. He also has Anonymous at 6-1. You have Graham Motion, who's no stranger to the Mid Atlantic, obviously with the second choice on the morning line, Fondly at 7-2, coming off a maiden breaking victory. You have Tom Amos with a horse like You'll Be Back. This is a very even field. I feel like this is a great betting race, and I'm excited to see if any of these fillies are able to really assert themselves and maybe put themselves into maybe Kaylie's top 10 moving forward next week.
Yeah, Gowells Delight definitely has been sitting on a big one. I feel like
Yeah.
for a decent amount of time, kind of gives quiet side vibes a little bit. Always a
Yeah.
bridesmaid, but I mean, here she has a clear advantage coming into this with the best gate speed of any other horse in the race. She's usually upsetting the pace. Or she's sitting right off of it, but she's always in contention with the pace. So definitely, you would start with her when you're looking at this race, but you definitely have a few others that are pretty interesting, switching up dynamics that might sit a bit closer, like, the number 7 Girl Math, who's
Yeah.
switching back to the dirt. And she, was up on the pace in a lot of her dirt starts, before switching to the synthetic. And then Anonyma, who last time out in the Honeybee just had a pretty unfortunate trip, but usually she's sitting a bit closer too, so the one might have to go from the rail. So there's, it looks to not have a lot of speed in the race on paper, but when you start looking into the dynamics, it does get pretty interesting
It
in terms
does. It
of
depends on what trip everybody wants to get because you're right.
Mhm.
The number one Icona Mama, is a horse that has good early speed, but you draw that inside rail. You don't want to get shut off. Johnny Velasquez is aboard. One thing we know about Johnny is nobody's better at getting gate speed out of a horse than Johnny Velasquez. He's going to get that horse out there in a good position early. You mentioned Gowells Delight. Obviously, that horse is going to be prominent early on in the race. You'd imagine the two McPeek horses aren't going to battle each other too much. Anonymous can sit a little off, but again, can be part of the pace scenario early on. Tom Amos, of course, you'll be back, is stretching out from 6 furlongs. And so that's a horse that's likely going to be up on the pace. And then a horse that you and I both really like a lot is number 8, Fondly, for trainer Graham Motion. We're quite fond of this horse, pun intended. And this is one who broke her maiden in debut at Tampa Bay Downs going 7 furlongs and couldn't have been more impressive in a trip where she had all sorts of problems.
Yeah, she broke from the one hole, so she broke inwardly there. I don't think she touched the rail, but definitely wasn't a great way to break first time out. And then good thing she had, pretty good natural speed that was able to get her into the mix of the race. And then, she happened when she came up around the turn. I mean, she was nearly like pulled up at one point. She came too close to the horse in front of her. And then when she did happen to get around that, she came down the stretch. She took a decent amount of time to switch her leads. And once she did, she flew by those two horses in front of her and she won by 4. So like you said, 7 furlongs is a really difficult distance to get first time out. You add the fact that she had all sorts of trouble in that start and she still, was able to pull away and win by 4. And she wasn't being asked too hard. I mean, she strikes me as a pretty decent sized filly. She looked to be, and she covers a decent amount of ground too. So, I thought that she's definitely a wild card that's likely to take a big step up and is a way to get around the favorite. And she's a horse that can probably sit off of a few of these front runners like the number 3 and maybe set an ideal trip that way. So
Yeah, absolutely. There's 2 other things that I think are worth noting here. One is she's picking up Irad Ortiz Jr. And, so she's picking up arguably the best jockey in the country right now. And one of the things Irad does better than anybody is, I think, sit that tracking trip. I think that's where he's at his best. And the other thing that coincides with that is she's going from the outside, the inside to the outside. And that's a move that I always like when horses escape the inside rail. If they've been drawing it maybe a couple of races in a row, or they had a bad start on the inside, and then the next start you see them, hey, they're on the outside, not necessarily the far outside, but further outside. You go, hey, that's going to be a more positive start for this horse. Not give this horse as much to do. Going to be an easier trip. Irad's going to presumably be able to look to his left and be able to judge what's going on in that early pace scenario. If everybody's going, then he can kind of sit back and kind of just sit off the flank of that. If nobody's going, then he can take the advantage and maybe sit right off of a horse like Gowells Delight, or you'll be back depending on how everybody breaks. So I just think when you factor all those things in consideration, this is one that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, Graham Motion, no stranger to the Mid-Atlantic. And the other thing I'll mention about this horse is good pedigree. Half to a horse that we both like a lot, which is Antiquarian, who was the winner of course, the Grade 3 Peter Pan last year, going 1 1/8 miles. So distance is not going to be an issue at all for this one. And so just a lot to like there with Fondly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you covered it. The antiquarian thing I was going to touch on. That's definitely, antiquarian not only stretched out effectively, but was super precocious as well and did that in his second start as well. So, there's a lot of runners in this family that are precocious and have stretched out in distance early on as well. So that was another positive to see. And of course, antiquarian, improved with more ground in front of him as well. So, and it's not that big of a step up when you take into consideration that it is still a 1-turn race as well. So,
yeah, no, that's a good point. It's a good point about Antiquarian being more precocious. You don't necessarily think about Preservationist because that's his sire as being particularly precocious, but he was, which really does speak to probably the dam side being the more precocious element there. And yeah, it's going to be fun to see. Antiquarian's a horse that I fell in love with last year. Anybody who knows me knows I love that horse because my friend Sarah El Badiwi and I joke that we jokingly call the horse Aquarium because we could never pronounce his name correctly, and so we just called him something else. But then yeah, so anyway, a lot of inside jokes with Antiquarian, but nevertheless, this one is yeah, I think Fondly makes a lot of sense. Gowells Delight, we both think is going to continue to be the bridesmaid here. A really good horse could absolutely win, is going to be included on my ticket, probably going to be included on yours if you're playing that late pick 5 at Colonial. But I just do wonder if I just wonder the trip she gets, whether or not there's maybe too much pace pressure, not enough pace. It'll be interesting to see. And she's a very good horse, but I do wonder if she's just kind of destined to be this kind of runner up all the time.
Yeah, and like you said, it will definitely depend on who else goes here. I mean, I put the number 6, You'll Be Back third,
Yeah.
who, like we mentioned, has good early speed as well and should be sitting a nice trip from breaking from the 6th hole. I mean, should have enough time to get herself into a good position down that chute, going into the turn. And I think
Mm-hmm.
this one's one that, the speed that she has could put her into the race early. And also maybe if she's sitting second or third, she doesn't have to exert herself too much, that I think, she's one that could take a piece here. And then I mean, the number 7, Girl Math, is pretty
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me because I think that she can take a step up here, switching back to the dirt. I mean, it's not like her synthetic form towers over what she ever ran on the dirt.
Yeah.
Actually, she put 2 back-to-back good efforts on the dirt, I think a 73 and a 71. And then on the synthetic, it was a 74 and then a 69 last time out. So, it's not like she's a much better synthetic horse and she found her calling there. I know it might
Right.
look like that on the dam side, but she is by McKinsey. And, I just think that this is one that we can see improve switching back to the dirt and also should be in the mix early because she has shown good speed in her dirt form as well. And I mean, last time in the Cincinnati Trophy, you can excuse that. That was just a runaway race with white
Yeah.
sands on the front end. And, her trainer has really good numbers as well, switching from synthetic to dirt over the last 5 years, 7 for 22, so 32%.
Yep.
And yeah, so I think this one is going to definitely take a piece here.
Horse, because you're right. If her running style returns to what it was on the dirt, then she's going to be a
Hmm.
little bit more forward. You saw her really being much more of a closer on the synthetic, and you have to imagine that had something to do maybe with footing, maybe
Hmm.
post positions in a couple of instances, kind of drawing far outside in one of those. And so she's an interesting horse because she broke her maiden on the synthetic. So you might say, well, and she broke her maiden with Lasix. And so it's an
Hmm.
interesting dynamic. It's also worth noting that Flavian Pratt, who rode her 2 of the last 3 times out, is opting to run Safi Joseph Jr.'s horse early on, who's 8-1, the number 5 horse. Meanwhile, it's Luan Machado, who's back aboard Girl Math. However, Machado is the one who rode her to victory.
Hmm.
And so, no problem having the Axeman come up on the mount here for Girl Math. So I think it just depends on how you want to look at the jockey situation. But certainly Machado is a proven jockey, knows the horse, knows how she runs, knows how to get her to go. So I don't think there's any concern there. But it is interesting to see the dynamics in this race. And it just, like I said, feels very wide open. But I think you and I both think there's an opportunity that Fondly, if she runs a big race, could certainly assert herself into maybe the second tier of contenders for the Kentucky Oaks. So she might not ascend to that Tenma, Lacara, quiet side, good cheer level, but she could insert herself into that Ballerina Doro kind of, quick kick, that area, I think, with a big effort here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she ran, I think, a 72 in her
Yeah.
debut. So, yeah, I think she's pretty likely to take a step up here. And I think one of the horses that came out of that race won next time out as well. So that was good to see. I think the race
Yeah.
was just a month ago. So that was also another positive. I mean,
Yep.
I looked at Pratt hopping on early on, the number 5, and read into that a little bit as well. But I don't really know what to make of that horse. I mean,
Yeah. You and me both.
just yeah, last time out took a huge step up. I mean, not only back into maiden special weight company, but also open company.
Yeah,
And, took a massive step up there. Maybe it was the Lasix. I mean, definitely some questions to answer with this one. But yeah, that
yeah.
one was definitely another one that caught my eye with Flavian hopping on, but too many questions to use that one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I get it, and yeah, one of the horses I included in mine was the Iconomama number one,
Mhm.
8-1. This is a Pennsylvania bred, and uh, gets Johnny Velasquez up second back from the layoff. Is going a new distance, a mile and a 16th. But listen, handled the one turn mile in the Grade 3 Pocahontas very well at Churchill Downs back in September. Finished third that day to Lacara and Liam in the dust. And Lacara's a nice filly. Liam in the
Mhm.
dust, I think you and I both think is ultimately going to be a better sprinter, but it's still a nice horse.
Mhm.
And so that the fact that it's a one turn, like 8.5 furlong race makes me think, this one might be able to handle it. I don't know if she's a 2 turn horse, but she might be able to handle this sort of a
Mhm.
setup more as an underneath play. But definitely going to be a fun race and a very wide open one for the fillies. But let's transition from this one to the Virginia Derby. And this is going to be a mile and an eighth. Again, you don't see many mile and an eighth. Obviously, the old Belmont Park, you would see this. You see this over in the Saudi Cup, when they run over there, that mile and an eighth one turn configuration. This was drawn as a field of 10. However, there is a notable scratch. You'll see I have a strike through the number 2, John Hancock, for Brad
Mhm.
Cox. That was the second choice in the morning line. That horse is being rerouted to the Louisiana Derby. So John Hancock will scratch. It is a 9-horse field now. That will have a significant impact on the odds. Everybody's price is going to go down as a result. A Getaway Car is going to be a very short price. You will see a second choice like Rapture be a pretty short price. Even these 10-1, 12-1 horses are going to take some money as a result. But this is an interesting race because it's a unique configuration. And I have to credit track announcer who will be there on site on Saturday, Travis Stone, for sharing a little tidbit that our own Andy Serling retweeted. That's, I think, why it popped. Well, I follow Travis too, but I follow Andy as well. And so when Andy retweeted, it popped up on my feed, and I saw in 9 furlong races, 22% of winners are gate to wire. At Colonial Downs, that number is only 15%. So you don't see as many gate to wire winners doing this one turn configuration at Colonial. It usually wears out those front runners. Think what we've seen in recent years in the Saudi Cup, horses coming from off the pace to win that type of a race. It's hard to sustain that sort of a run when you're really exerting that much money, energy down the backstretch. Kaylie, this is a wide open field. You have a Bob Baffert horse and Getaway Car. You have a last out maiden winner in Rapture. Outside
Mhm.
of that, you have a lot of horses that have been knocking around and maybe looking for a big breakthrough. But interesting, and I'm curious where you ultimately went and how you thought about this race.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I started with Getaway Car. I mean, that
Yeah,
horse has the arguably some of the best speed of the group, and is going to be forwardly placed. I mean, I think the dynamics really depend on if Getaway Car, goes right for the lead. Maybe if a horse like American Promise goes as well, and Rapture, I mean, is 5-1 on the morning line, but like you said, is probably going to take a bit of money given the barn and the debut that the horse had. But I landed on the number 3, American Promise, who's been very battle tested in a lot of his starts and has really good early speed. I mean, I hope that this horse can be in a stalking position. I mean, he'll probably be on the lead if no one else goes, but I really thought that this one could sit off of Getaway Car maybe and sit a trip that way. But, definitely a good jockey change as well. This one has had a whole bunch of different jockeys. I mean, got a horrible
yeah,
ride a couple starts back, or maybe even the last one, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah.
But
Last two have not been great.
yeah, so now gets Nick Horace aboard, who has been riding. I mean, he just rode that filly for Dwayne Lucas and won with that filly
Yeah,
2 in a row. So, I mean, I think that this could be a nice fit for this horse as well. And if this horse happens to sit a nice trip, I mean, he has the speed to be involved in the mix and, ideally the endurance to stay up there. But I view this as an opportunity to go against two horses I think will be short prices, maybe.
Yeah, and listen, American Promise is, like you said, very battle tested in this regard. I mean, you look at those, even against the maiden competition, you saw him run up against horses like Chancellor McPatrick, T-Craft, Noble Confessor, Filoso, Render Judgment, who's also in this
Mhm.
race, Burnham Square, Monet's Magic. You know, he went up against a lot of horses. Last couple of times out has been going up against Graded Stakes Company. The speed figures aren't bad. You know, obviously, whether or not he's able to ever recapture that 95 buyer that was over a muddy sealed track at Oaklawn, three back is a question mark. But even that effort last time out in the Risen Star, which
Mhm.
admittedly came back to be a very fast race, you
Mhm.
know, it got an 88 buyer finishing fifth that day, but was also on the inside rail. Maybe didn't get the easiest trip. And like you said, Nick's going to be aboard now. This one,
Mhm.
remember, this is a Justify out of a Tapit mare that was $750,000. There was
Yeah.
expectations with this horse. So
And obviously,
understandable. Yeah.
being a Dwayne Lucas horse, I mean, sometimes they're late bloomers. Clearly, he's a horse that's always had a ton of talent, but
Yeah.
this might be this horse's race. I don't know. You know what I
It
mean?
might be.
Could really
And
take
D
us.
Wayne, you know, he runs his horses as well. And you never
Mhm.
know when they're going to pop. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if American Promise runs maybe, you know, 2 weeks later, you know, in something else. It just Wayne likes entering his horses and he likes them to get them to run. But what that does is it builds foundation. And
Yeah.
he's not somebody. Wayne Lucas off the bench is usually not a winning angle. When it does win, that's notable, but it's usually not a winning angle. And so his horses take a while sometimes. He gets is no different than Kenny McPeek, you know, who a lot of times, again, more times that they run, the better they get. So, you know, I think that
Yeah.
is a good price to take into consideration. Certainly was my fourth choice. So I definitely see this horse being a part of that dynamic. My concern with this race is the pace. I do think American Promise is going to be very prominent for a variety of reasons. I think the last two times out just was not the trip. And I think this horse
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily need to be in the lead, but certainly needs to be forward. I would imagine Irad Ortiz Jr. with Getaway Car is going to be extremely aggressive getting up there on the front end for Bob Baffert. And we'll touch a little bit more on him in a moment. I think you could look at a horse like Authentic Gallop, has some really big races going back where that horse has really shown some good speed going straight to the front as well. And
And he
maybe
has the
like
speed.
rendered, what's that?
Yeah, and he has the speed to his inside as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So,
No,
I
no, no.
mean,
You're
he can kind of see how those horses, get into the mix early and play that. But that was another one I looked at in terms of, the early pace here, some pace
yeah.
presences.
Absolutely. And then you have a horse like Render Judgment who's getting blinkers on. Now that's a horse more of a deep closer. So the blinkers, I don't
Mhm.
know if that's going to necessarily get the horse up in the lead all of a sudden. But I ultimately landed on Rapture. And I did so in a very, I don't know, wishy-washy way. I mean, this is my level of confidence in this pick is like about a 40%, like maybe about a 35%. It's I think the horse has the potential to run a big race here. You get you get Flavian up on the mount for Brad Cox. Now, one of the things I've said, I was talking about on the Win Play show today, was Brad Cox has got a great fleet of fillies, but his Colts have not really fired this year. You know, Patch Adams was a disappointment down at Tampa Bay. Tappan Street finished second to Burnham Square in that Holy Bull. Burnham Square comes back to run a nothing race in the Fountain of Youth. It doesn't necessarily bode well for Tappan Street. You know, you've not seen these Cox Colts necessarily take off and really impress the way that his fillies have. So Rapture's one who won last time out, breaking his maiden with Lasix, mind you. Now is switching off Lasix. The buyer speed figure is a modest 82 from that. But clearly, this is a horse that there are some expectations for.
Mhm.
Uncle Mo out of a Bernardini mare. So the pedigree would say, hey, this is absolutely a horse that should be on the Triple Crown Trail and on the Kentucky Derby Trail. And, you know, I always am going to be attracted to horses that I think have untapped potential. I think that's what Rapture has. He can sit a little bit. He showed that in that last out victory. He also draws a little further outside to the outside of Getaway Car and American Promise.
Mhm.
So similarly, Flavian can kind of look and see what's going on in terms of that early pace scenario and maybe take back a little bit. So Rapture ultimately ended up being my top choice. But listen, we both have to talk about Getaway Car. You have second. I have third for Bob Baffert. he was going to initially enter gaming in this race, potentially both gaming and Getaway Car. Gaming ultimately spiked to fever, so it's only going to be Getaway Car here. This is a horse that ran a really good race in that Sunland Park Derby and has the pedigree up top to suggest he likes distance. But it's just a matter of if he's up front and getting pressured, how long can he sustain that sort of a run in this race?
Yeah, I think that honestly, the reason why I have him second is because I know he's going to be a very short price. He's obviously
Yes.
your likely win candidate here. I mean, this is the only horse that Baffert's sending here, and he has great speed, the best of the group, and it is a one-turn race as well. And I think that he should be able to sustain his run. I mean, it depends how much pressure obviously he faces from American Promise and a few of the others that we mentioned. But if this horse happens to walk the dog on the front end, I don't see anyone beating him. I mean, I don't see it
Yeah.
playing out like that. I think you're going to have a few that try to go with him or at least pressure him along the way. And hopefully it could set up for, my number 3 or your number 7, who should sit similar
Yeah.
trips if Getaway Car is up on the front end. But yeah, I think he's pretty hard to get around. And you got to imagine that he's going to hit the board here, or he's likely to, no matter what. I mean, this is the one horse that Baffert has here, and clearly is a horse that has been running against great company and a lot of other speed, and he's
Yeah.
the speed of this group. So
Yeah. Yeah, he's going to be tough to beat in this spot, depending on how the pace plays out on the front end. One of the things I will say, I was always a little skeptical of Getaway Car, but you go back and look, the last 4 races, he finished second to Citizen Bull in the American
mhm.
Pharaoh. Well, I mean, hello, Citizen Bull's your champion 2-year-old and hasn't lost in about 4 months. Then he goes to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, runs 4th that day, basically in a merry-go-round track where he's running 4th the entire way around. Okay. Then he comes back, finishes second to Journalism. Well, shoot, Journalism is the top Kentucky Derby contender. He's 3-1 right now in Kentucky Derby futures. So he's your current favorite for the race. And then he comes back and beats Caldera in that Sunland Park Derby. And a lot of people think Caldera might be D. Wayne's best chance at the Derby horse for this year. So he's not really done much wrong in a lot of ways. Like, this is a horse that's been knocking heads against very, very good company. And so his record might not necessarily display the caliber of running he's capable of doing. So, he's not going to be left off my ticket. He's going to be a very short price. He might be odds on by the time it actually comes to post. We'll wait and see. But going to be a lot of fun. I do want to mention a horse. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Kaylie. No.
I was going to say, with all this speed, I mean, that's why you have a horse like Omaha, and then I landed on a horse like Calling Card as well to use underneath. I mean, those are 2 horses that, are going to be coming late and should be coming and picking up pieces. I went more towards Calling Card. The 2-week turnaround really caught my eye, and you could see how that benefited a horse like Mason, who just made, obviously different trainer, but that same type
But
of idea
same
where
angle,
that horse, didn't do that much running in the Sunland Park Oaks. And then, she came back to win impressively next time out. And this one's sort of similar, that he didn't do much running in the Gotham. I mean, he got shut out around the turn once he did start moving. And then he had to go so wide that it kind of took him out of the race there. And he hasn't done much wrong prior to the Gotham. So you have to imagine that this horse is going to come back and, he's way better than what we saw in his last start. And he's going to have more pace to close into, just like your Omaha will. And, I think that I'm really keying in on the 2-week turnaround for this one. Obviously he's, ready to go.
I hear you on that, and listen. I'm on a certain level. I'm rooting for Calling Card because he was my top pick as a long shot in the Gotham, and I then looked like an idiot because he finished like almost last. But so if he comes back and runs well, I can at least say, "Aha! I told you this horse was sitting in a big race. It's just the wrong race." But Omaha is a horse that, much like what you described, this is a late running horse who honestly has not had a ton of pace to run at the last couple of times. And whether that be in the Jerome or whether that be in the Withers, where he's getting 113 and change, 6 furlong fractions. Let me tell you something. They ain't going 113 and change. They're going 111, and 4, I would imagine, maybe 112 flat. They're going to be going faster because of that one-turn configuration. So he's going to have that closing ability here. And this is a horse that also just has gotten progressively faster every start. 75, 78, 80. He's moving in the right direction. I think he could just be a horse that runs up into something. I love that the connections, Michael Gorham, are sticking with jockey Raul Mania. You always like to see the good juju. We're not upgrading anybody. We're not suddenly ditching a local jock in favor of somebody else. So I like that. The jockey knows the horse and the connections. And then, my special angle, a Virginia bred running in Virginia. Come on, this is easy money. And so this is an easy game. Shout out to our friend Donnie Nelson. But listen, it is, it's going to be a good race. And yeah, I mean, that pace scenario and that track configuration could really lend to a lot of different things. A horse like Render Judgment on the outside, we haven't really talked about for Kenny McPeek. That horse maybe sits mid-pack and could make a run late as well. That's a horse that I think you got to take seriously for Kenny in this spot. And then you look at a horse like Studley Do Right. I swear to God, he runs one more Kentucky Derby prep race, he's going to get a set of steak knives. I mean, this horse just keeps running Kentucky Derby prep races, finishing third and fourth and fifth, but getting points. I love him, but
I was surprised you didn't use him.
I know. I'm a sucker. I had him fourth for a second, and I was like, I can't keep doing this. I just can't do this to myself. I got to stop picking Studley Do Right in my top 4 because he just doesn't come through for me anymore. But yeah, it should be a really fun race. I can't wait to see it. If Getaway Car wins, that's a big story. If Rapture steps up and runs a big race, that's a big story. Obviously, if D. Wayne wins this race, that's huge. And if any of these other horses win, that's a little bit of like a Lonnie Briley situation. Like, oh my God, a huge, smaller connections, like suddenly getting into the Kentucky Derby. So going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait for this one. But
yeah, I'm super excited. And for the Oaks as well, obviously.
obviously excited for the Oaks. A lot of good maiden races on the undercard. So if you're interested in those, make sure to check out the Capping the Card, which will be out on Friday morning, where I go through all, I believe, 10 races that are on the Saturday card at Colonial Downs. There are some really intriguing maiden races there that Kaylie and I have been talking about off screen, looking at pedigrees, looking at OBS workouts, looking at sales prices, all sorts of good stuff. So Kaylie, it's going to be a lot of fun. And you're going to be doing a little bit of a video, if people are watching this Thursday morning, later today, on 2 very exciting fillies who are coming back for their 4-year-old campaign.
Yes, Just FYI is making her return, as well as Gun Song. So that's going to be very exciting. I mean, Gun Song is your morning line favorite, a little, I think 7-5, and Just FYI is 8-5. I mean, I know that's pretty close, but I'm pretty happy that Just FYI is the second choice, so I can bet her. Because she's a champion returning for Mont, who has great numbers off the layoff at Gulfstream. So that should be a great race tomorrow.
Yeah, no, hey, listen, we got you covered every day of the week here on NYRA Bets. So, Kaylie, thank you so much for hanging out with me and talking about these races at Colonial Downs. And thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Road to the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks. For Kaylie Shapiro, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.